My name is Charlotte, and I never imagined that the day meant to honor my son would become the stage where my own sister tried to erase me. The chandeliers glowed, the champagne flowed, and 200 guests filled the ballroom. Yet the only thing anyone remembers from those first minutes of the wedding reception is the sound of her voice echoing through the microphone. She gripped the mic with that practiced confidence, her designer dress hugging her frame like armor. I stood just a few feet away, still adjusting the pearl necklace my mother had worn at her own wedding decades earlier. My son Jake was radiant with his bride beside him, smiling as cameras flashed. Then Sandra spoke. "Everyone," she began, her tone sugary sweet. "This is my sister Charlotte. She used to work in marketing, but now well, let's just say she's between opportunities." A nervous chuckle rippled through the crowd. But she wasn't finished. "You know, not everyone can handle the corporate grind. Some people burn out. Some people give up. My sister chose the easy way out. She's basically an unemployed loser." Quote, the words cracked through the air like a whip. My throat tightened. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Conversations died. Glasses froze halfway to lips. The string quartet faltered, one violin note stretching awkwardly before cutting off. Every eye in the room turned toward me. I felt the blood rush to my face, but I forced my expression into calm neutrality. Years in boardrooms had trained me well. You don't flinch when your rival attacks. You stand tall, you let the silence do the work, and you wait. Yet inside, a storm raged. She had chosen this moment, my son's wedding, his once-in-a-lifetime celebration, to humiliate me publicly. What she didn't know was that her words carried farther than she intended. Standing near the bar, surveying the crowd with an unreadable expression, was David Chen, the CEO of TechVision, the man she constantly bragged about knowing. The man who had once offered me a position worth $300,000 a year. The same man who owed part of his company's success to the campaigns I had built years ago. Sandra thought she was dazzling him with her cruelty. She thought tearing me down would make her look stronger. But the only thing she was doing was tightening the noose around her own neck. I glanced toward Jake. My son's jaw was clenched, his arm around Emily's waist. His eyes burned with protective anger, but Emily whispered something to calm him. I shook my head slightly, signaling him not to step in. This was my battle, my humiliation. My choice whether to endure or respond. The crowd swelled around us, eager for spectacle. I caught sight of phones raised discreetly, recording every word. In that instant, I understood the power of narrative. If I let her define me, then every guest here, every colleague, every executive, every relative would carry her version home. Charlotte, the failure. Charlotte, the burnout. Charlotte, the cautionary tale. But if I waited, if I chose my moment wisely, the story could flip. And when it flipped, it would flip forever. Sandra leaned into the mic again, basking in the attention. "Of course family comes first," she added, her lips curling. "And Charlotte has certainly chosen family. She quit her job, threw away everything she worked for, just to sit by our mother's bedside. Noble, perhaps, but hardly what I would call success." Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd, some sympathetic, some judgmental. My chest ached, but my resolve hardened. She had no idea what kind of fuse she had lit. Because standing 10 feet away, listening to every poisoned word, was the very man who had been trying to bring me back into the corporate world. The same man who knew exactly what I was worth. I steadied my breathing, lifted my chin, and smiled faintly. The game had just begun, and Sandra had made her opening move. But she didn't realize I had been playing on a much bigger board. And if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been reduced to less than your true worth, you know the fire that ignites in your chest. You know the quiet promise you make to yourself, "I will not let this stand." What Sandra believed was her triumph was, in truth, her downfall. She simply hadn't realized it yet. I had not always been the woman my sister mocked. For 2 decades, my identity had been carved from long hours, bold strategies, and results that spoke louder than any title on my door. I was a marketing director in one of the most competitive cities in the world. My office sat high above Manhattan, with glass walls that overlooked endless towers and streets pulsing with ambition. That view had been my reward for years of missed dinners, forgotten birthdays, and 60-hour weeks that chewed up my energy but fattened my reputation. When the phone rang that morning, 6 months before the wedding, I thought it was another crisis. A campaign on the brink of collapse, a client threatening to pull millions in ad spend, another fire only I could put out. Instead, it was an oncologist's voice, heavy with the kind of truth that slices through every illusion of control. Stage 4. Months, not years. My mother was dying. The words rewrote my entire existence. That afternoon, I signed my resignation letter. 20 years of work collapsed into a single page. Colleagues stared as I walked out, carrying only a box of photographs, awards, and the resignation note that felt more like a death certificate for my old life. I knew the whispers that followed. She cracked. She burned out. She chose personal life over success. But I also knew something they could not understand. No campaign, no product launch, no budget, whether $50 million or 5, could compare to the fleeting chance to hold my mother's hand while she could still recognize me. Sandra, of course, reacted exactly as I expected. My younger sister thrived on comparison. Every achievement of mine had been a mirror in which she measured her own reflection. When she heard I had stepped away, she masked her delight in thin layers of concern. "So you're just done?" she asked, her voice dripping with false innocence. She toyed with the strap of her new Hermes bag, a gift to herself after her latest promotion in human resources. I was at our mother's house then, replacing an IV bag I had learned to manage through online tutorials and the guidance of a patient nurse. Sandra tilted her head, lips curling in the faintest smirk. "All those years climbing the ladder, and you're throwing it away to play nurse? Not everyone can handle corporate life long term." The words pierced me deeper than I admitted. Yet, I kept silent. Caring for our mother was not failure. It was responsibility. It was love. Still, Sandra left after snapping a photo with Mom, posting it with a caption that read, "Family first." Her followers clicked like. She returned to her office, to her boardrooms, to her life untouched by the daily decline of the woman who had raised us both. Meanwhile, I became invisible in the world I once ruled. Former colleagues texted cautiously, curiosity hiding beneath concern. LinkedIn connections wondered why my profile went dark. Event invitations vanished, as if unemployment was contagious. But every night, when my mother squeezed my hand with the strength she had left, whispering, "Thank you for being here," I knew the truth. Success had never been the corner office. It had never been the salary, the flights, the power lunches. Success was showing up when it mattered. Still, I could feel the weight of Sandra's shadow pressing closer. Every family gathering became another battlefield where she highlighted her new titles and my supposed irrelevance. Easter dinner turned into a performance. "Charlotte's taking a little break from the real world," she told cousins with a condescending pat on my shoulder. "Some people just aren't built for the long haul." She posted her promotions online with hashtags like #girlboss and #corporate-life, sprinkling in veiled jabs that everyone understood. Success is a choice. Some people choose careers. Others choose other things. Our relatives repeated her words like gospel, shifting their respect toward her, sliding job listings toward me, as if offering medicine for a disease. But I reminded myself of what mattered. Every campaign I had run, every dollar I had managed, every result I had produced, all of it had trained me for strategy. And strategy is about timing. About knowing when to act, when to wait, and when to let your opponent dig their own grave. Sandra thought she was winning. She believed that my silence proved her superiority. What she did not realize was that silence was my weapon. The board was set, even if she couldn't see it. And the day would come when the narrative she had crafted so carefully would collapse under the weight of truth. For now I sat by my mother's side, trading deadlines for IV bags, presentations for whispered conversations, profit margins for the fading comfort of her smile. It was not glamorous, and it was not celebrated. But it was real. It was mine. And though the world saw me as a woman who had thrown everything away, I knew something Sandra would never understand. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose love over ambition. Jealousy has a way of rotting quietly until it finally bursts into the open. With Sandra, it had always been there, simmering beneath smiles that looked supportive but carried edges sharp enough to cut. When I was promoted to director, she sent flowers with a card that read, "Congratulations, now don't forget where you came from." When I bought my first apartment, she joked about how some people get lucky breaks. Her success was never enough unless mine could be diminished. After I stepped away from my career, her jealousy no longer had to hide. It strutted openly, dressed in designer labels and dripping with self-satisfaction. She was thriving, or so she wanted everyone to believe. She had risen to Human Resources Director, a position she flaunted at every family gathering. With her new promotion came an expensive handbag and the smug certainty that she had finally surpassed me. "You know," she said one afternoon while scrolling through her phone at Mom's kitchen table, "not everyone is built for pressure. Some of us thrive on it. Some don't." Her eyes flicked to me as I changed Mom's IV bag, the unspoken message hanging in the air. She took selfies with Mom, posting them with captions like "Nothing matters more than family," though she only visited once a week, staying long enough to capture the image before rushing back to her important meetings. Her followers applauded her dedication. Meanwhile, I stayed, cleaning up, calming Mom's confusion, whispering comfort during nights when the pain left her trembling. Sandra didn't see that part. She didn't want to. To her, sacrifice was weakness, and my choice to walk away from a career she envied but could never match was proof she had won a game I had never agreed to play. It wasn't only family gatherings where she made her point. She leveraged every platform available: Facebook posts about promotions, LinkedIn updates flaunting recognition from executives, captions sprinkled with hashtags that carried knives between their letters. Girl boss. Never settle. Career first. The message was clear. Sandra was climbing while I was falling, and she wanted everyone to notice. Our relatives did. Uncle Robert, who once asked for my advice on his small business, now turned to her for guidance. Aunt Patricia slid job listings across the table at Sunday dinners, whispering as though unemployment was contagious. "Just in case you want to get back out there," she said, as if I had vanished into irrelevance. At first I let Sandra's digs pass. My silence seemed like indifference. But inside, each word planted seeds of anger I buried beneath patience. I reminded myself of my mother's soft gratitude each night, of the truth that success was not about applause from relatives or strangers online. Still, it hurt. It always hurts when blood chooses ambition over loyalty. Sandra reveled in it. She polished her achievements like trophies and used my supposed downfall as her contrast. "Melanie's taking a little break from the real world," she told cousins at Easter, patting my shoulder like I was a child. "Some people just aren't built for the long haul." Laughter followed, uneasy but present. I wanted to stand, to shout, to remind them of the millions I had managed, the campaigns studied in business schools, the respect I had commanded. But I stayed silent, not because I lacked words, but because timing mattered more than defense. Sandra believed she was writing my obituary in real time, crafting the narrative of a woman who rose and then collapsed under the weight of pressure. She never realized that by speaking so loudly, she was exposing herself. Every cruel word was a record, every sneer was a receipt, and eventually, those receipts would be collected. For now, I endured. I focused on what mattered, holding my mother's hand, cooking her favorite soup on days she could still eat, listening to the fragments of memory she tried to piece together through the haze of illness. Those moments were mine. They were worth more than every like, every title, every handbag Sandra waved in my face. But make no mistake, jealousy may have fueled her, but it was also blinding her. She was so consumed with proving me small that she never looked up to see the shadow of her own downfall approaching. And I knew when the right moment came, her jealousy would write the script of her destruction far better than I ever could. There is a particular sting that comes not from strangers, but from people who once admired you. When I walked away from my career, I thought the hardest part would be adjusting to life outside the constant hum of deadlines and campaigns. I was wrong. The hardest part was watching the way people's eyes shifted when they looked at me. At first, the messages came in private. Former colleagues texted to ask if I was all right, their words lined with polite concern. But beneath the surface I could feel it, their curiosity, their disbelief. Did she crack under pressure? Was it a breakdown? Did she get fired? Those whispers traveled faster than truth ever could. LinkedIn was worse. My profile sat untouched, frozen in time at the peak of my achievements. I saw the notifications pile up, people clicking through, viewing my career history, studying the campaigns I had led. They were searching for clues. Why had I disappeared? Why had someone at the top of their game suddenly gone silent? And silence, in this world, is rarely interpreted as strength. Invitations stopped arriving. Panels where I had once been asked to speak chose other names. Networking events I used to headline now happened without me. It was as if stepping away made me invisible. As if the years of results, 300% return on investment, year after year, $50 million budgets balanced with precision had evaporated overnight. Even family caught the infection of doubt. At dinners, Uncle Robert no longer sought my opinion on his business ventures. Instead, he leaned toward Sandra, nodding as she dispensed recycled management cliches she had read in a corporate handbook. Aunt Patricia slipped folded sheets of paper toward me, job listings printed from websites. "Just in case you want to get back out there," she whispered, as if unemployment were a secret disease. Sandra fueled the fire with a strategist's precision. Every holiday, every gathering became her stage. She announced her promotions loudly, congratulating herself with hashtags and posts that doubled as daggers aimed at me. "Success is a choice," she declared on Facebook. "Some people choose careers, others choose other things." Everyone knew who the others were. The weight of their judgment pressed down harder than I expected. I had thought my choice would be respected, even admired. Instead, it was treated like weakness. And in the quiet moments, I wondered if they were right. Had I thrown away too much? Was I fading into irrelevance? But then night would fall, and I would sit beside my mother's bed. Her hand, fragile and trembling, would curl around mine with surprising strength. "Thank you for being here," she whispered. In those words I found my compass again. Still, Sandra's campaign worked. The narrative spread. Colleagues who once envied me now pitied me. Friends avoided the awkwardness of asking about work. Even strangers online, people I barely knew, speculated about my burnout. The identity I had built for 20 years was being dismantled, piece by piece. Not by my failures, but by a sister's ambition and a family's quickness to believe the worst. I kept my head down, but I was not blind. I knew every rumor, every side glance, every printed job listing handed across the table was part of the same story Sandra wanted to tell, that she had surpassed me, that I was finished, that she was the victor in a race only she was running. But what she did not understand, and what no one around me could see, was that I was not finished. I was waiting for the moment when truth would be undeniable, waiting for the stage she would build with her arrogance, waiting for the instant when silence would no longer protect her, but condemn her. For now, I endured the shifting eyes, the whispered pity, the subtle humiliation. I let them think I was gone, irrelevant, forgotten. Because I knew that sometimes the best strategy is not to fight every lie, but to let your opponent grow so confident in their false story that they shout it from the rooftops. And when the rooftop collapses, the fall is theirs alone. The week before Jake's wedding, I was sitting at my mother's bedside, adjusting her pillows, when my son walked in. His tie was loosened, his eyes weary from another long day at Tech Vision. He had inherited my analytical mind, but also his father's warmth. That balance made him exceptional at reading people, and I could see from the look on his face that he carried news he didn't want to deliver. "Mom," he said gently, "I think you should know what Aunt Sandra has been saying at the office." His voice was careful, as though the words themselves might wound me. I kept my eyes on the medication schedule, my hands busy, because I already knew whatever came next would sting. What has she been saying? He hesitated before continuing. She's been telling people you had a breakdown, that you couldn't handle the pressure anymore. He paused, searching my face for a reaction. She tells them you quit because you weren't strong enough. Some of my colleagues believe her. I inhaled slowly, forcing my expression into neutrality. Sandra's cruelty didn't surprise me. She had been weaving that story for months, building herself up by tearing me down. But hearing that she had carried it into Jake's workplace into his new beginning was something else entirely. It's not right, Jake said firmly, his voice hardening. You gave up everything to care for Grandma. That takes more strength than any corner office ever could. His defense stirred both pride and sorrow in me. He shouldn't have had to defend me. Not at work. Not among colleagues who should have judged me by my record. Not his aunt's poisoned words. He brightened slightly, as though wanting to give me hope. My new boss is coming to the wedding, David Chen. He asked about you when I mentioned your background. I think he might have heard of you. I smiled faintly, touched by my son's attempt to comfort me. What Jake didn't know, and what Sandra certainly didn't know, was that David Chen had more than heard of me. Years earlier he had watched me salvage a failing startup, turning it into a $200 million acquisition. And only weeks ago, he had offered me a senior vice president role at TechVision, with a base salary of $300,000. I had declined, choosing mom over money. Sandra had no idea. She thought her whispers were defining me. She didn't realize the man she idolized was about to see her perform her cruelty live. That night, after Jake left, I sat by Mom's side listening to her shallow breaths. Even in her fragile state, she noticed the weight on my shoulders. "Don't let Sandra get to you," she whispered. Her hand, frail but steady, found mine. "She's always been insecure. You know who you are. Quiet strength, remember?" Her words sank into me like steel. Quiet strength. I repeated them silently, letting them fortify me. Because I knew Sandra would not stop. She would seize her moment at the wedding. And I could not control what she said, but I could control how I responded. In strategy, timing is everything. You don't rush to reveal your hand. You let the opponent believe they're winning, that their story has become truth. And then, at the right moment, you show the facts that dismantle their narrative entirely. Sandra thought she was clever, whispering about breakdowns and failure to Jake's colleagues. She didn't realize she was writing the opening lines of her own downfall. Each rumor, each careless dig, was laying the groundwork for the collapse of her credibility. I kissed my mother's forehead that night, promising her silently that I would not let Sandra's lies define me or Jake. Whatever happened at that wedding, I would stand tall. I would carry myself with dignity, even if Sandra dragged my name through the mud, because dignity was something she could never fake. And in that promise, I found peace. Sandra could speak as loudly as she wanted, but truth has a way of waiting patiently, then arriving with thunder. The morning of Jake's wedding dawned cool and bright, the kind of autumn day that seemed to promise clarity. I stood in my childhood bedroom, staring into the mirror, fastening the same pearl necklace my mother had worn on her own wedding day. My reflection looked calm. But beneath the surface, nerves ran like electricity. I knew Sandra would find her moment to strike. The only question was when. Mom sat in her wheelchair by the window, wrapped in a soft shawl. That morning she was lucid, her eyes sharp despite the shadows of illness. When she looked at me, it was as if she could see through every layer of fear I tried to conceal. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," she said, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. I turned to her, my throat tightening. She had fought so hard to be here, to share this moment with me. Even if she couldn't attend the ceremony, her presence in this room mattered more than any guest list. "Don't let Sandra get to you today," Mom added. "She's just insecure, always has been." I forced a smile, though the truth of her words hit harder than she knew. Sandra had always measured herself against me, every success of mine twisting like a thorn in her side. And now, with me away from the corporate stage, she saw her chance to stand taller by pushing me lower. I leaned down, kissing Mom's forehead. I'll remember, Mom. Quiet strength, right? She nodded, her eyes softening. Quiet strength doesn't mean silence. It means knowing when to speak, and when to let others condemn themselves with their own words. Her wisdom settled into me, grounding me. The weight of my decision pressed against my heart. If I let Sandra's story go unchallenged, then 20 years of work, reputation, and respect would vanish under her version. But if I chose to respond, I risked turning my son's wedding into a battleground. As I smoothed the fabric of my dress, my phone buzzed. A notification from LinkedIn flashed across the screen. Someone had been viewing my profile, downloading my portfolio pieces, combing through my history. My old career was not as forgotten as Sandra wanted to believe. Offers still waited. Doors had not closed. I slipped the phone into my clutch and took one last look around the room. Photographs lined the shelves, family vacations, holiday gatherings, milestones that reminded me why I had made my choice. I had walked away from the office to be here, to make sure my mother wasn't alone. No title, no salary, no applause could outweigh that. Still, my chest tightened at the thought of 200 guests whispering about my supposed breakdown. Former clients, industry leaders, even 3 CEOs Jake had invited. They would hear Sandra's version if I stayed silent. Worse, it could taint Jake's first steps at TechVision, coloring his colleagues' perception before he had a chance to prove himself. I straightened, breathing deeply. Today wasn't just about him marrying the love of his life. It was about legacy. About reclaiming the truth of who I was, not for vanity but for the future my son deserved. Mom's voice pulled me back. Remember what I taught you. Sometimes strength isn't the loudest answer. Sometimes it's the calmest. Her words rang in my ears as I wheeled her toward the door so she could see me off. She raised her hand in blessing, and for a moment, I saw not the frail woman weakened by illness, but the mother who had carried me through every storm. Go make me proud, she whispered. I smiled, tears stinging but unshed. I will. As I stepped into the car that would take me to the mansion on Long Island, I knew Sandra would be waiting, her words sharp, her stage prepared. But I also knew I carried something she never had. A strength rooted not in titles or promotions, but in truth. And truth, once spoken at the right time, has the power to silence every lie. The drive to the wedding felt longer than 40 minutes. Each mile carried me closer not only to Jake's big day, but to the battlefield Sandra had been preparing. The mansion was stunning, its stone walls wrapped in ivy, chandeliers glittering through tall windows. Guests in elegant attire flowed across the manicured lawns, laughter and music blending with the clink of champagne glasses. On the surface, it was perfect. But beneath that surface, I could sense the storm waiting. Inside, the cocktail hour was already buzzing. Servers weaved through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres. I scanned the room, and that's when I saw him, David Chen. He stood near the bar, tall, composed, observing everything with the sharp gaze I remembered from years ago. Back then, he was a desperate vice president struggling to save a collapsing startup. I had pulled off the turnaround that led to a $200 million acquisition. He knew exactly who I was. And the faint smile he gave me across the room was not the smile of a stranger. It was the look of someone holding cards he hadn't yet played. Sandra appeared at my elbow, her perfume cloying, her grip tight on my arm. Come on, she said sweetly, steering me toward a group of Jake's colleagues. There are people you should meet. Her voice rang false, as always. She introduced me with practiced charm. This is Jake's mother, Melanie. She used to be in marketing, but she's taking time off now. The young woman with the TechVision badge clipped to her purse looked curious. Oh, what company? I opened my mouth, but Sandra cut me off, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. She's between opportunities. You know how at Island, not everyone can keep up with corporate life forever. I kept my expression neutral, though my pulse quickened when I noticed David Chen had moved closer, lingering near a photo display, pretending to admire the decorations while clearly listening. That's when my phone buzzed. A LinkedIn message appeared from an unnamed sender. Check your email. DC. I opened it discreetly. My heart skipped when I saw the forwarded message and offer letter from Tech Vision, dated just 1 week earlier. Senior Vice President of Marketing Strategy. Base salary $300,000, plus bonuses. I had turned it down with gratitude but finality, explaining my mother's illness. David's reply had been simple. The offer stands whenever you're ready. Sandra's sharp laugh broke into my thoughts. Jennifer asked what you're doing these days, she said loudly, her eyes gleaming with cruelty. I'm in transition, I answered calmly, forcing myself to stay steady. Sandra chuckled, her voice like glass shattering. That's a nice way of saying unemployed. Her words cut through the group like a blade. A few people looked down awkwardly. Others leaned in, sensing drama. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw David Chen watching, waiting. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have supported you, you know how the silence tastes. Bitter, heavy. But it's also the silence before a storm. And this storm wasn't going to be mine. Because Sandra had no idea that the man she idolized, the one she claimed mentored her personally, was standing 10 feet away. She didn't know that he had already chosen me. She didn't know that every word she spoke was digging her deeper into the grave she had built for herself. This wasn't just a wedding reception. It was a stage. And Sandra was writing her own downfall, line by line. Before I continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between your career and your family? Would you have made the same choice I did? Share your thoughts below, because your stories matter. I steadied my breath, holding my ground. Sandra's voice grew louder, her audience wider. She thought she was in control, but timing is everything. And I knew the right moment was coming, and when it came, she would never recover. The crowd was buzzing, unaware of the tension between what was spoken and what was hidden. Sandra, fully confident in her narrative, continued her performance. Every word she uttered, every laugh she forced, reinforced the story she had told for months. Charlotte was a woman who had failed, who gave up under pressure, who abandoned her career for family. And to the unsuspecting guests, especially the young professionals sizing up opportunities, it sounded plausible. David Chen, however, was no stranger to her type. He had followed my career, monitored my achievements, and respected the choices I had made. He had been waiting for the right moment, a moment when Sandra's arrogance and ignorance would meet the facts he held firmly in his grasp. That moment was now. I felt the subtle shift as he moved closer, positioning himself where he could quietly observe every interaction. His presence was commanding but understated, the kind of authority that makes people forget themselves. Sandra, oblivious, continued with her critique of my choices. She's exploring options, she said with a smirk. Taking time off, family first. Some people just aren't built for long-term success. I remained calm, letting the words fall around me like autumn leaves. I didn't need to correct her, not yet. The crowd was absorbing everything, reacting subtly but not yet understanding the full scope. Every phone raised, every head tilted to catch her voice, contributed to the illusion she had built. Then my phone buzzed again. Another LinkedIn message flashed, this time more urgent. Check your email. DC. I discreetly opened it. There it was, the formal offer from Tech Vision. Senior Vice President of Marketing Strategy. Base salary $300,000, plus bonuses. I had already declined weeks ago, prioritizing my mother's care over corporate accolades. But now, seeing it in that room, in that moment, I realized the leverage I held. Sandra, speaking with such confidence, was unknowingly playing into my hand. She thought she was defining me, but in reality, she was revealing her ignorance of who I truly was and the power I still commanded. Every statement about my supposed breakdown, every condescending note, was now a testament to her arrogance. I adjusted my posture, smiled faintly, and allowed myself a quiet thought. Patience was my weapon. I had learned to wait, to observe, to let the opponent overextend. Sandra had done exactly that. Her voice carried over the group, announcing achievements and projecting authority, all while she unknowingly exposed the fragility of her own understanding. And then I noticed the subtle signs in the crowd. A few guests exchanged glances, whispering. Some leaned in, sensing that something was amiss. Others subtly raised their phones, capturing her words. The recording would be evidence, a permanent record of the narrative she had built on false assumptions. Sandra's timing was perfect for her, but it was even better for me. The seeds of doubt she planted about my supposed failure were about to bloom in a way she never anticipated. I caught David Chen's eye. He raised a finger slightly, signaling that he was ready. The energy shifted. Sandra was still unaware, basking in the attention of her audience, her performance nearing its peak. Every word she spoke was a brick in the wall that would trap her when the truth emerged. For years, I had been underestimated, whispered about, measured against impossible standards. And yet, here I was, standing in full control, armed not with anger but with strategy, timing, and the truth that would soon be revealed to everyone. Have you ever been misjudged by someone you trusted, or underestimated by someone close? Share your story below, because understanding the power of timing can change everything. I let the buzz of the room fill my senses, keeping my smile calm. Sandra continued, unaware that her script was about to be interrupted, that the cards she thought she held were already in my hand. The revelation she didn't see coming was about to unfold. The moment for truth was imminent, and with it, the collapse of the story she had so confidently crafted. The tension in the room was palpable. Sandra was oblivious to the fact that her entire narrative was about to unravel. She continued, elaborating on my supposed failure, painting me as someone who had cracked under pressure and abandoned a stellar career. Every word she spoke reinforced her self-assured image in the room, but unbeknownst to her, the most powerful observer had already noticed the cracks in her story. David Chen, the CEO, had been monitoring the scene from a short distance, his expression calm yet commanding. His eyes were focused, absorbing every word Sandra spoke, every flourish, every exaggerated gesture. He had been trying to recruit me for months, and now the timing was perfect. The audience, 200 strong, was none the wiser, but the stage was set for a dramatic revelation. I stood quietly, letting Sandra finish her little monologue, carefully observing how the crowd reacted. A few guests exchanged uncertain glances, sensing the tension, the underlying drama, but they didn't yet understand the full story. Phones were raised discreetly, capturing her every word. Every statement about my supposed failure, every comment on my absence from corporate life, was being documented. Sandra thought she controlled the narrative, but the truth was closer than she realized. David Chen had all the context. He knew about the offers I had declined, the impact I had made in his previous company, and the strategic brilliance I had displayed over decades of marketing leadership. He knew that what Sandra was publicly mocking my absence from the corporate world was a deliberate, compassionate choice, not a failure. Her voice rose as she described my career as a cautionary tale, and I felt the room tighten around us. Every sentence she spoke, every smirk, every condescending glance, made her look more confident to the crowd. But to those who knew the truth, it was starting to appear like arrogance, masking ignorance. And then I felt a subtle shift. David moved slightly closer, positioning himself where he could discreetly intervene. His presence alone carried authority. Even the background chatter seemed to dim. I sensed that the moment for the truth was near, a moment that would dismantle Sandra's carefully constructed facade. She continued to boast about her promotions and accolades, mentioning her direct connection with the CEO, completely unaware that David Chen himself was listening. Her assumption of control over the narrative was almost palpable, as though she had written the script for everyone to follow. I steadied myself, preparing to act strategically. Years of navigating high-stakes corporate environments had trained me to recognize the perfect timing. Patience was a weapon, and Sandra had just given me the advantage of overconfidence. Every word she spoke was a step toward her own undoing. In that moment, I realized that the power of observation was just as important as the power of action. I didn't need to interrupt or argue. The moment would reveal itself. The audience would witness the collapse of her story when the right intervention came. and all the evidence was already quietly in place. I thought about my mother, resting peacefully at home, who had instilled in me the principle of quiet strength. Sometimes the most impactful response is not immediate confrontation, but carefully orchestrated truth delivered at the perfect moment. That principle guided my next steps. Sandra's performance continued, oblivious to the approaching reckoning. She was completely unaware that the most critical person in the room, the one whose perspective mattered most, had already positioned himself to expose the full truth. The crowd sensed the tension, but they were still waiting, like spectators before the fall of a house of cards. Have you ever been underestimated, or someone tried to take credit for your choices? Comment below, because sometimes timing and strategy are the keys to proving your true worth. I maintained my calm, letting Sandra speak, knowing that the narrative she believed she controlled was about to be dismantled, piece by piece. The moment of revelation was imminent, and when it came, everything would shift. The air in the ballroom shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough for me to feel it. Sandra continued her monologue, her words sharp, rehearsed, and dripping with condescension. She was fully convinced of her narrative that I had failed, that I had given up, and that my life outside the corporate world was proof of weakness. She didn't notice the way the crowd had begun to sense a discrepancy, the tiny pauses, the uncertain glances exchanged between guests. David Chen, standing quietly nearby, observed every motion, every gesture. He had known my history for years, the campaigns I had led that generated 300% return on investment consistently for 5 consecutive years, the $50 million budgets I had managed flawlessly, and the corporate rescues that had turned failing companies into multi-million-dollar acquisitions. What Sandra perceived as absence, he understood as deliberate strategic choices. She kept speaking, oblivious to the fact that the person she idolized was only steps away, listening to every word. Her tone suggested control, but each claim was a brick in the wall she was constructing around her own downfall. She had become so absorbed in presenting herself as superior that she failed to see the larger picture. The person she tried to humiliate had quietly orchestrated the stage, and the intervention was already in motion. I remained calm, letting the conversation unfold. Every phrase she uttered reinforced her belief in her power, but she could not anticipate the looming revelation. Guests continued to lean in, some recording discreetly, their curiosity heightened. I could see their expressions shifting, questioning, sensing that Sandra's story did not fully align with the reality of my accomplishments. Then, David stepped forward, his posture commanding attention without demanding it. The subtle movement was enough to draw eyes, to capture a fraction of the audience's focus. Sandra continued, unaware that the real authority was about to speak. She described my decision to leave the corporate world as career suicide, using the microphone to broadcast her judgment to the room. The timing was perfect. David, a man whose career had been directly impacted by my past work, was now positioned to deliver the truth. Every word Sandra had spoken that aimed to diminish me was about to be reframed. Every whisper of doubt replaced with undeniable evidence of my skill, judgment, and integrity. She paused briefly to catch her breath, adjusting her designer dress, smiling as if to reward herself for the performance. The audience, caught in the tension, watched with mixed curiosity and discomfort. Some faces reflected empathy, others disbelief, but all were aware that a pivotal moment was unfolding. I felt a surge of calm focus. Sandra's overconfidence had blinded her, leaving her narrative exposed. Her words, meant to undermine me, were now visible as overreach. Every boast, every sneer, every truth she had presented was about to be tested by fact, observation, and timing. David raised his hand slightly, signaling to the wedding coordinator to bring a microphone. The sound of her voice would soon be contrasted with reality, and the balance of perception in the room would shift dramatically. The crowd leaned in, sensing that the dynamic had changed. Sandra had unknowingly set herself up for exposure. The quiet strength I had practiced for months, the patience I had cultivated while caring for my mother, was about to pay off in a moment of undeniable authority. I allowed myself a small smile, feeling the tension ripple around me. The room did not yet know it, but the narrative that Sandra had so confidently presented was about to collapse under the weight of truth. Have you ever waited for the perfect moment to reveal your side of a story or prove your worth? Comment below, because timing can turn the tables in ways you never expect. Every element of the room, from the chandeliers to the hushed conversations, seemed to be holding its breath, anticipating the revelation. Sandra had no idea the story was about to be rewritten, and I was ready to witness it unfold. The room had grown still, the buzz of the cocktail hour dampened by the intensity of anticipation. Sandra was still speaking, oblivious to the subtle shift in energy around her. She elaborated on my supposed failure, painting me as someone who had abandoned a career I had spent 20 years building. Her voice carried over the room, confident, rehearsed, and entirely convinced of her narrative. David Chen moved with calculated precision, closing the distance between himself and the center of attention. His eyes never left Sandra, yet they occasionally flicked to me, offering a subtle signal that the moment for revelation was approaching. The crowd, sensing the tension, instinctively leaned closer, phones discreetly raised, capturing every word of the impending confrontation. Sandra continued her monologue, oblivious to the fact that she was laying bare her own misconceptions. "She's exploring options," she said, adjusting her posture as if to reinforce her authority. "Taking time off, focusing on family. Not everyone can handle corporate life long term." Her laughter, meant to underline the supposed weakness, instead echoed with the irony of her unawareness. I stood quietly, letting her weave the narrative she believed to be truth. It was a delicate strategy. One misstep could disrupt the flow. One premature reveal could undermine the impact. Years of navigating high-stakes corporate politics had taught me the value of timing, observation, and patience. Sandra had unknowingly provided the perfect stage for the counterstrike. David Chen, known for his composure and strategic acumen, finally spoke, his voice calm yet carrying the weight of authority. "I have been trying to reach Charlotte for weeks," he began. The room fell quieter, a collective intake of breath signaling that the dynamic had shifted. Sandra's eyes flickered briefly, uncertainty creeping into her expression. "You have spent months telling people she is unemployed, that she cannot handle pressure," David continued. "Yet, Charlotte declined multiple offers, including mine, not because of inability, but because she chose to care for her mother during her final months. That is a testament to strength, not weakness." Gasps rippled through the audience. Sandra's composure faltered. Her carefully constructed image began to crumble as the implications of David's words took hold. The power she believed she wielded over perception was dissolving before her eyes. He pulled out his phone and displayed the formal offer letter she was unaware of. Senior Vice President of Marketing Strategy at TechVision, $300,000 base, plus bonuses. The offer, she had assumed irrelevant, was proof of the value and recognition I commanded in the corporate world. The audience, now fully attentive, absorbed the juxtaposition. Sandra's narrative of my failure was collapsing under the undeniable evidence of competence, respect, and opportunity. David's presence transformed the atmosphere from one of quiet judgment to palpable anticipation. Every phrase he spoke reinforced the reality Sandra had ignored. My career and contributions were not erased by absence. My choices were deliberate, and my value remained intact. The crowd, previously complicit in her performance, began to shift allegiance. Their attention now on the truth being revealed in real time. Sandra's attempts to maintain control became increasingly desperate. Her voice trembled slightly as she tried to interject, but David's calm authority overshadowed her. The subtle power dynamics of the room shifted irrevocably. I took a steadying breath, feeling a sense of quiet triumph. The stage she had constructed to humiliate me had become the platform for my vindication. Timing, strategy, and patience had converged to turn the tables entirely. Have you ever found yourself underestimated, only to see the truth emerge at the perfect moment? Share your experience below, because sometimes silence and timing are the most powerful allies. Sandra had set the scene for confrontation. I simply allowed it to unfold naturally, knowing that her overconfidence would be her undoing. The room was poised for a revelation, and everyone present, including Sandra, was about to witness a profound shift in power, credibility, and perception. The atmosphere was electric, a mix of anticipation and tension. Sandra continued to bask in her perceived triumph, unaware that the real turning point was about to unfold. David Chen had positioned himself strategically, observing every movement, every word, and every reaction. His calm presence radiated authority, commanding attention without overtly demanding it. The guests, sensing the subtle shift in energy, leaned closer, their curiosity intensifying. Sandra's voice rang out, detailing my supposed failures, painting me as someone who had burned out and abandoned a career that once defined me. She continued, oblivious to the fact that every statement she made was a thread in the web she had woven for her own unraveling. Her smirk, her gestures, her false air of confidence, all of it played perfectly into the moment I had been waiting for. I stayed composed, letting her words flow over me, knowing that the revelation would have a greater impact if I remained silent, allowing the audience to absorb the contrast between her narrative and the truth that was about to emerge. David Chen, standing just a few feet away, had already coordinated with the event staff. A wireless microphone was brought forward, and the room's attention subtly shifted toward him. He began speaking, his voice steady and authoritative. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to take a moment to address something I observed tonight, which reflects on values, family, and true professional integrity. The room quieted instantly. Even the background music seemed to fade as his words commanded attention. He turned to the crowd, eyes sweeping across the audience, then focused directly on Sandra. 6 months ago, Charlotte made a choice that many would consider difficult. She stepped away from one of the most successful marketing careers in our industry, not because she failed, not because she couldn't handle pressure, but because her mother needed her. A hush fell over the room. The impact of his words began to permeate every corner of the ballroom. Sandra's confident posture faltered, a flicker of disbelief crossing her features. The contrast between her public narrative and the facts David presented was undeniable. He continued, detailing my professional accomplishments, managing $50 million annually, generating 300% return on investment consistently for 5 consecutive years, and orchestrating campaigns that led to a $200 million acquisition. Each sentence reinforced the reality that my skills, experience, and judgment were unparalleled, and that my choice to prioritize family did not diminish my professional worth. Sandra's attempts to interject were cut short by the sheer authority of David's presence. The crowd shifted, sensing the imbalance of power. Phones were raised discreetly, recording every word, preserving the truth that would soon overshadow Sandra's narrative. David then revealed the offer letter that had been extended to me, the position of Senior Vice President of Marketing Strategy at TechVision, with a base salary of $300,000 plus bonuses. The audience gasped, realizing the magnitude of what Sandra had attempted to dismiss. I had been offered one of the most prestigious roles in the company, a recognition of my expertise, and I had declined it to honor my commitment to my mother. The revelation was complete. Sandra, who had sought to humiliate me, now faced the undeniable truth. Her narrative was unraveling in real time, exposed not through confrontation but through the quiet, strategic positioning of facts and authority. The audience, including Jake's colleagues, shifted their attention from her to me, recognizing the disparity between perception and reality. I felt a surge of calm satisfaction. The moment had arrived. Sandra's overconfidence, her arrogance, and her desire to dominate the narrative had set the stage perfectly. By maintaining composure, by allowing the truth to emerge through timing and strategy, I had turned the situation to my advantage. Before the evening unfolds further, consider this. Have you ever waited for the perfect moment to assert your truth or demonstrate your value? Share your experience below, because patience and strategy often reveal strengths unseen in haste. The room was now ready for the next phase. Sandra had underestimated the power of preparation, patience, and truth. Every detail, every calculated move, was about to reshape the perception of success, loyalty, and integrity in the minds of everyone present. The energy in the ballroom shifted dramatically as David Chen raised the microphone, his voice carrying clearly through the crowd. Every eye turned toward him, the murmur of conversations fading into attentive silence. Sandra, still unaware, beamed with misplaced confidence, thinking she had controlled the room with her narrative. Little did she know, the next moments would redefine the entire evening. "Ladies and gentlemen," David began, his tone authoritative yet measured, "I am honored to be here celebrating Jake and Emily's wedding. But I must address something I just witnessed, something that speaks to values, integrity, and what true success looks like." His gaze locked briefly on Sandra before sweeping across the audience. 6 months ago, Charlotte Irwin stepped away from one of the most successful marketing careers in our industry. Not because she failed, not because she couldn't handle pressure, but because her mother required her care. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Sandra's expression faltered, confusion mingling with disbelief. The audience began to understand that her story might not be the truth she had so confidently presented. David continued, methodically presenting the facts. "My management of $50 million annually, consistent 300% ROI over 5 years, and the transformative campaigns that led to a $200 million acquisition." Each detail dismantled Sandra's narrative, piece by piece. The most shocking revelation came next. David held up a letter, clearly visible to the crowd. Charlotte was offered the position of Senior Vice President of Marketing Strategy at TechVision, with a base salary of $300,000 plus bonuses, and she declined, choosing family over personal gain. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. The young professionals, Jake's colleagues, and family members, exchanged stunned looks. Sandra's smug confidence began to crumble. She had built her performance on the assumption that the audience believed in my supposed failure. That assumption was now shattered. Sandra tried to interject, to salvage her composure. I was only," she stammered, her carefully crafted words failing to match the authority in the room. David raised a hand, silencing her. His presence was overwhelming, and the crowd instinctively recognized the shift in control. The audience now turned to me. I stood tall, calm, and collected. Years of experience had taught me that sometimes the most powerful response is not to interrupt, not to argue, but to allow truth and timing to do the work. Sandra's own arrogance had created the perfect stage for my vindication, David continued, addressing the broader implications of Sandra's actions. He explained how her attempt to humiliate a family member had violated company values and professional conduct standards. He clarified that Charlotte's choices demonstrated exceptional character, combining professional skill with compassion and loyalty, qualities far more valuable than any title or salary. The room was silent except for the faint hum of air conditioning. Phones still recorded, capturing every word of the revelation. Sandra's face had gone pale. Her carefully constructed superiority was crumbling in real time. Every boast she had made, every subtle jab she had delivered, now seemed hollow against the evidence presented by someone whose judgment commanded respect. Then David delivered the coup de grace. "As a result of your behavior, Sandra, you will be removed from your position at TechVision, effective immediately. Security will escort you out after the reception. This decision is based on violations of professional conduct and creating a hostile environment, both of which are incompatible with the values we uphold." The crowd reacted with audible murmurs. Some gasped, others exchanged astonished glances. Phones continued to capture every moment, and Sandra's carefully curated image of control collapsed completely. She tried to speak, her voice cracking with desperation, but it was too late. The stage had shifted entirely. In that instant, I realized that patience, strategy, and quiet strength had transformed what could have been a humiliating experience into one of complete vindication. The crowd's attention had fully shifted, the truth had been revealed, and Sandra's actions had directly led to her own downfall. The power dynamics had reversed, and I stood firmly in the center, not only vindicated, but empowered. Every calculated move over the past months, every choice to prioritize family, had culminated in a moment that no one present would soon forget. Sandra's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Her carefully maintained composure unraveled before the crowd. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, hands trembling as she struggled to process the magnitude of David Chen's declaration. The very moment she had intended to elevate herself had transformed into the spectacle of her own humiliation. She had been so consumed by the desire to assert dominance over my story that she failed to see how exposed she had become. Security discreetly approached, positioning themselves at the edges of the room. The message was clear. This was not a negotiation. Professional consequences were imminent. Sandra's panic intensified, her attempts at verbal protest faltering under the weight of undeniable authority and fact. She had built her narrative on assumption and arrogance. It had crumbled because the reality she ignored could not be denied. Meanwhile, I maintained calm. The tension in the room was palpable, yet I felt grounded, almost detached, as if witnessing a drama from the perfect vantage point. I had spent months strategizing, observing, and preparing. Every word Sandra spoke, every gesture, had been a thread in a tapestry of overconfidence that David's intervention would unravel. The crowd, initially silent, now reacted with a mixture of awe, sympathy, and intrigue. Guests who had been captivated by Sandra's performance began to redirect their attention, registering the stark contrast between perception and reality. The young professionals, colleagues of Jake, exchanged knowing looks, absorbing the lesson that appearances could be deceiving, and authority must be informed by truth. David Chen addressed Sandra once more, his tone firm but professional. Your behavior has demonstrated a lack of empathy and professionalism. You publicly humiliated a colleague and family member while representing your company. This is incompatible with the standards we uphold at TechVision. The words landed like a gavel striking final judgment. Sandra tried to interject, but the room's focus had shifted completely. Her narrative of superiority had been dismantled with precision, timing, and indisputable evidence. The crowd absorbed the gravity of the situation, many recording discreetly to preserve the moment for posterity. It was clear that the consequences of her actions were not simply personal but professional. At that point, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the months of care, patience, and quiet resilience settle within me. Sandra's downfall was not the result of vengeance or confrontation. It was the natural culmination of her own choices. By choosing overconfidence, arrogance, and cruelty, she had created the conditions for her own undoing. I felt a surge of empowerment as the room acknowledged the reality of my accomplishments, my sacrifices, and my integrity. The respect I had built over 20 years, once at risk of being overshadowed by Sandra's narrative, now shone in stark contrast to her failed attempt to diminish me. David's final words to Sandra were deliberate and measured. Please hand over your company equipment to Jake. Your actions tonight have consequences, and professional accountability is required. The statement was clear, concise, and publicly enforceable. Sandra's resignation, effective immediately, was the formal acknowledgement of a defeat she could neither deny nor mitigate. The audience absorbed the gravity of the moment, recognizing that integrity, competence, and the choice to prioritize what truly matters could not be overshadowed by petty ambition or envy. The lesson was universal, transcending the specifics of the corporate world and family dynamics alike. Those who act with cruelty and arrogance will ultimately be undone by the weight of truth. I watched quietly as Sandra was escorted away, feeling a profound sense of closure and empowerment. Her absence was a testament to accountability and the consequences of overreach. At the same time, the room's energy shifted toward recognition, admiration, and newfound respect for the choices I had made, not just professionally, but personally. The narrative had completely flipped. What had begun as a setup for humiliation had become a powerful affirmation of strategic patience, moral courage, and the value of measured action. Sandra's path was her own, irrevocably altered, while mine remained fully within my control, strengthened by truth and resilience. The final moments of the wedding reception carried a sense of culmination and quiet triumph. Sandra had been escorted from the ballroom, leaving an unmistakable void at the table she once dominated. The energy shifted immediately, the room recognizing the weight of accountability, truth, and strategy. What had begun as an evening of celebration had transformed into a defining testament to integrity, patience, and measured action. I stood tall, a subtle smile on my lips, watching the ripple effect of the events unfold. Guests who had previously whispered and exchanged glances were now openly acknowledging the reality of my achievements, sacrifices, and steadfast commitment to family. David Chen approached, his expression calm yet approving. "Charlotte, your decisions and dedication are inspiring. Your presence here has reminded everyone of what true leadership and courage look like." The audience's attention, once focused on Sandra's perceived dominance, shifted fully toward me. Former colleagues, clients, and executives recognized the depth of experience and ethical clarity that had guided every choice I had made. Phones were raised not to capture scandal, but to document a profound example of composure, strategic thinking, and resilience. The atmosphere, previously tense, now hummed with admiration and quiet awe. As the evening continued, business opportunities began to manifest almost instantly. Conversations that had once been casual networking transformed into serious inquiries about partnerships, consulting, and collaboration. Multiple executives approached me, offering opportunities that far surpassed any single corporate role. Recognizing that my combination of expertise, ethics, and insight was rare and invaluable. I paused for a moment, reflecting on the months leading up to this evening, the long nights by my mother's side, the careful observation of Sandra's maneuvers, the strategic patience that had allowed truth to align perfectly with timing. Each choice, each act of restraint, had set the stage for this overwhelming affirmation of worth and authority. In the midst of the reception, Jake and Emily approached, their faces radiant with pride and happiness. "Mom, this is incredible," Jake whispered, his voice filled with admiration. "You didn't just stand up for yourself, you showed everyone the power of quiet strength and deliberate action." I hugged him, feeling the weight of the past months dissolve into a shared sense of accomplishment and relief. David Chen stepped forward once more, addressing the assembled guests with a final, deliberate acknowledgement. "Charlotte Irwin represents the pinnacle of professional excellence, ethical clarity, and strategic foresight. Tonight demonstrates that leadership is measured not only by results, but by the courage to make difficult choices with integrity and purpose." The audience erupted into applause. It was genuine, unforced, a collective recognition of achievement, resilience, and ethical authority. The narrative that Sandra had so confidently tried to impose had been replaced by a reality shaped by truth, patience, and calculated action. As the reception wound down, I took a quiet moment to look around. The dance floor shimmered with laughter. Conversations carried the excitement of celebration, and yet there was a sense of enduring respect and acknowledgement for the decisions I had made. Sandra's absence, once conspicuous, now underscored the consequences of arrogance and misplaced ambition. In that moment I realized the ultimate lesson. Success is not measured solely by titles, salaries, or external validation. True accomplishment comes from alignment with one's values, courage to make difficult choices, and the patience to allow truth to reveal itself in its own time. The evening had transformed from potential humiliation into a profound affirmation of character, strategy, and resilience. If you've ever faced underestimation, or someone tried to rewrite your story, consider the power of timing, strategic patience, and unwavering adherence to your values. Share your story, reflect on your choices, and recognize that true victory often comes quietly, with impact that resonates far beyond immediate recognition. As the night concluded, the room settled into a sense of calm celebration. The guests danced, laughed, and toasted, but the underlying narrative had shifted irreversibly. Truth had triumphed, patience had been rewarded, and the lessons of courage, integrity, and strategic thinking would linger far beyond this evening. Sandra had chosen her path. I had chosen mine, and my path was one defined by autonomy, values, and undeniable accomplishment. The evening finally settled into a gentle rhythm, the music softer now, conversations quieter, and the celebration taking on a reflective tone. I stepped outside for a breath of cool autumn air, the stars faintly visible above the Long Island estate. In that quiet moment, I allowed myself to absorb everything that had unfolded: the humiliation Sandra had attempted, the vindication delivered by truth and timing, and the recognition of my own choices and strength. I thought of my mother, lying peacefully at home, whose wisdom had guided me through every storm. Her encouragement to maintain quiet strength, to act with patience and integrity, had never felt more real. I had honored her, standing firm without allowing anger or vengeance to dictate my actions. I had transformed a potential public shaming into a demonstration of resilience, strategy, and moral clarity. The contracts, the accolades, the opportunities that flooded in, while impressive, were secondary to the knowledge that I had acted in alignment with my values. I had been present for the moments that mattered most, for my family, for my son, for my mother. I had shown that success is not only measured in dollars, titles, or recognition, but in the lives we touch, the commitments we uphold, and the integrity with which we act when no one is watching. Sandra had written her own story with her choices. I had written mine. The difference was that mine was grounded in purpose, clarity, and unwavering adherence to what truly matters. And as the night wound down, the memory of this wedding, once a potential site of humiliation, became instead a symbol of triumph, quiet, dignified, and profoundly meaningful. Sometimes the best revenge is not loud or dramatic. It is living fully, authentically, and with purpose. The power of patience, truth, and unwavering values had carried me from being underestimated to standing resolute, celebrated not just for my achievements, but for the life I had chosen to lead on my own terms. And in that knowledge, I felt complete, peaceful, and ready for every next chapter.